The final battle is about to begin as David travels back in time to join up with Dad to stop Farouk permanently, while Sid and the Carries travel back more to save baby David from ever becoming his dark future self. That is, of course, assuming that the Time Eaters don't destroy all of reality around them. It's the penultimate episode of Legion, Chapter 26. Hey everyone, D here, and welcome to this week's review of Legion. So yes, of course, all the spoilers are ahead. Plus, do want to remind you about our quick jump index system. In the description below, I have this entire review broken down, titleized, time-coded. You can watch the end of the review first. You can watch the beginning here last. You can watch this review in any order you'd like. So yes, getting up near the end. Only one episode left after this, and they have done, I think, a beautiful job of setting up. And that's really what a lot of this episode, I think, was. Establishing really the playing field for where this big battle between Charles and Farouk, and I guess, well, now David too, is going to happen. And I have to say, this sort of, I think, is a perfect way to sort of wrap up the series, and of course, this particular season with David intending to try and go back to save his younger self, to stop Farouk from ever inhabiting his body. So, of course, it's all going to have to end up in this big scene, which we, I think, as fans have been wanting to see since all the way back in the big chalk discussion in season 1, where David kind of finally learned and realized where his history was and where Farouk did come from. So I think they did a beautiful job in this of really setting that mood, taking time to establish the mood before even David shows up, and of course, Sid as well. And that's the other side of the episode that we have going on, is of course Sid following David to try and save what ends up being his younger self. Last episode we had, of course, her second childhood, her second growing up, and she does tell Gabriel all about it. I've had 2 childhoods. I've grown up twice. But really learning the lessons of compassion, the opportunity to save, and here really applied. There are some people you can save and some people you can't save. And interestingly, David fits into both of those categories in this episode. Adult David, he is too far gone. He has really lost it. Not entirely his own fault, of course, but that's just the reality of the situation. Younger David, however, has his whole life ahead of him. The world of opportunities. That is someone that he can save. So I love the fact that they did sort of split this off. This wasn't going to be really a Sid versus David type of thing, as David has sort of his own mission and Sid sort of has her own mission as well. Carrie with Sid's mission, not necessarily too happy. I did love that one scene. He's a baby. We could just kill him now. It'd be so easy. Physically easy, yes. Morally, not way too much. He's a baby. You can't. That's why you can't go back and kill baby Hitler. Still a baby. Still hasn't done those things that potentially could become. But that's really Sid's mission here, is how do you alter this past in order to change that, really, and having those great little scenes with Gabrielle. So, like I said, a good episode of setting things up, giving us, as fans, sort of what we want to see, giving a great establishment. Not a whole lot of big movement and action here, but really, like I said, it's setting the places to what's probably going to be a phenomenal finale. So, Farouk and Charles. Again, this is something that we've all been wanting to see, and we got a sort of little taste of it earlier on in the season when we got sort of this time travel episode more from Gabrielle's perspective, a little bit less than from Charles's, but at the setup of their relationship. Here we get to see the actual kind of battle, the travel. What did Charles go through? What was the encounter with Farouk like? And I think they've done a beautiful job of establishing both Charles's naivete, but his inner strength, especially put up against someone like Farouk, who establishes pretty immediately his power, his strength and his belief being able to surpass Charles's abilities. We get a great opening scene where it looks like Charles having a nightmare on the plane, seeing this strange bull play going on in front of him. A bullfighter taking out the bull with the stabbing and the killing, and then you pull off the bull and it's Charles's face. Kind of symbolic there. You're being pulled in, much like a bull to the slaughter, to be danced around and played with. And I do love that we get our little instances here of the devil with yellow eyes. Farouk is an impressive individual, but he is all charisma. The devil with yellow eyes, that persona, that projection, is so terrifying. And I love whenever that's used. That with the same kind of scratchy music, both in the horns and the violin and such. It's just a beautiful establishment of horror. I love that. So I appreciated getting that early scene of the devil with yellow eyes. Again, really illustrating the danger that Charles is going in. You never should have come, the creepy voice. But yeah, Charles here is traveling. He has found someone like himself. He is excited in that sense of the exploration of the new. And in some ways, Farouk is the same way, or so he pretends that he has found someone else, how excited he was to see and be seen another individual of his caliber, a brother of that fork. And I would imagine that when you are the power that Farouk, the Shadow King, is, finding someone that can even relate to you is a nice thing. Perhaps they can be on your side, perhaps not, but it's at least a game that's worthy of playing. But Farouk, again, establishes that strength of his very early on. The driver showing up with a portrait of Charles painted by a man that he has never met, that knows all about him. He goes in and talks about later on about his wife and his kid, and you're an artist too, and a soldier and a scientist. All of these things that Farouk has seen. And while he puts it in the guise of a pleasant host, I am so excited to see you. This is purely establishing how superior he is to Charles. Charles doesn't know anything about Farouk outside of, here's this man who is there that has a similar power. Whereas Farouk has looked back on that gaze and seen everything about Charles. And sets it up very pleasantly, presentation-wise. So again, so excited to see you. Let us eat, let us discuss. You know, we're seeing creepy things. The monkey in the cage is odd. Of course, we have the driver appearing and disappearing. A lot of mind games that Charles isn't aware are being played, I think, at that stage, which is more Farouk establishing his superiority. So even as he welcomes Charles into his home, he is showing how much more that he knows. Especially when we get to see him introduce the astral plane, which is like old hat for someone like Farouk. An entirely new experience for Charles. So he is teaching him, he is showing him. Again, I think from Farouk's standpoint, if you're really going to play the game, might as well be with somebody who is worthy of playing. Do you find an ally or do you find an antagonist? Either way, your life is more interesting. And I think that's why Farouk is doing what he is what David calls him, why he has pulled Charles into this trap. And it is a trap indeed, again, as he starts to see more. The disturbance of the monkey, the fact that the kids don't have any voices, they're all mute. Even as he's saying, that's not nobility, that's decency. He is still the king, and they are just subjects. And I loved our establishment, actually, as why they call him the Shadow King, because of the shadow play that he does to entertain the kids. I don't think that's really the case. But we do get to see a bit of history of Farouk playing himself up as the hero, an evil king that he rises up just from the streets, from the people to defeat, and then blessed be everyone around. Now he shares everything, and he is the honorable and the thoughtful and the compassionate and the generous king in front. And yet no, lies, all lies. As David says, showing up right at the end there. And that's where things really start to twist. I think that it's perfect. We get a good establishment of what Charles is walking into who he was up against. And now suddenly all of those plans are about to be very, very disrupted. Now, when David shows up, I think what we really start to see here is the definite strength of Charles's intellect. Because when David first appeared to Gabrielle earlier on in the season, just sort of that brief go, scared the hell out of her. Of course, Gabrielle, a little more unstable, some mental illness going on in the family, which we'll talk about. But I think for most anyone else of that instance happening would be a little thrown off. Charles, not so much. He accepts David rather quickly. I mean, sure that he asks questions, but his appearance, he is curious, but he is not frightened, nor is he combative in his reactions. When he gets pulled up into David's mind space, since he has already experienced that with Farouk, this is not a new experience. He's able to adapt to that quickly. And I think Charles adapting to new knowledge really is, I think, a sign of his personal strength. And I love that whole bit where we have sort of David meeting his dad and his dad meeting his David. It was a very interesting, the idea of feeding him knowledge as cake. Normally the cake is a lie, but in this case, does have some knowledge in it. I thought was sort of a beautiful way of doing it. Very Wonderland-ish. A theme we've already hit on earlier on in the season with our tea party scene with our escaped squirrel and Lenny. So again, it had sort of a little feel to it. And I loved how they just did that. Little flashes, changing of the light, changing of the focus and everything. It was a beautifully whole set up scene right there. And the whole reaction of now absorbing all of this knowledge and seeing David, his son, for the first time, and the whole reaction. Again, it was a beautifully done bit. It was a nice way for them to connect and again also show Charles's strength in adapting all of this new information. It doesn't throw him off. He processes it all very quickly. And I think, again, like I said, that's a definite strength from Charles's side. And we also get a little glimpse of the rest of David's mind, the knocking on the door behind him, which, of course, we could all guess is all of the other Davids. But that's held off for now. In the meantime, let's meet Farouk. And that, look, I'm just going to say it, is our Scene of the Week for this week. And that is, yes, Charles introducing his friend, who's stationed here in Morocco. Was a beautiful scene. And the reason it was is this is David kind of filling up his dream, being in his power place. And also, I think, really the first time we see Farouk completely thrown off. Because this is not someone that he is expecting to see, and he can't mentally dive into him. Every time he does, he's just getting those cold pictures and the freaky music going on in the background. And just David's sort of happy response as he's toying and playing, and Farouk's trying to get information. And David, he's got places of town, he's got operation names, he's got all the background info that he needs to go ahead and play this out. Has he pulled it out of mind? Is he making it all up? Is it just confidence? Who knows? Does it matter? No, not at all. It's establishing David in, finally, a position of strength dealing with Farouk. And Farouk being completely unprepared to deal with it. The fact that it's throwing him off so much, and he really does not have the strength to deal. I mean, this is the positive end of all of those back and forths between Farouk and David over these past seasons, is now David has the training, the knowledge, the ability in order to hold off an attack by a Farouk that has not gone through all of the whole lives of dealing with David and gain that really develop that inner strength of being separated from his body. This is a powerful Farouk, but not one as powerful as David. And just establish that whole, and there's just one little scene it was beautiful to see. And like I said, the music every time as he's trying to pose in, and that's all he can get back. That was awesome. And that he ends it throwing back Farouk's line to him, "You should never have come." The same scary devil with the yellow eyes voice, I thought was just the perfect way to end that scene. But of course, that position of power for David doesn't last long because he's insane. He's crazy. He has crossed too many lines. He is too dismissive. And that really comes to a fore, of course, when Switch shows back up, who has just been losing teeth left and right. This final appearance, I don't know if she's even got any teeth left. But to me, this is really the fall apart for David. While we have the previous scene where he is so strong and in position and in control, we know that can't last because David's inner psyche is too fractured and he doesn't care, and he has lost his empathy. And that's shown immediately when Charles asks, "Who is this girl?" And David responds, "She's nobody. She's nothing. She was a means to an end." Which I think is the biggest heart-wrencher in the episode here. Completely dismissing Switch, who has been there trying to help him. He of course, has built up and said so many great and wonderful things, but you're hoping at the very least where he says just one small thing, "We're gonna be done. I care about," that there is that compassionate side. But here, no. Once David has gotten what he has, he is throwing Switch to the side. And the moment he does that, all of his creation of persona, the projection of self that he is trying to present, completely falls apart. Which is, of course, when he goes catatonic and Charles is introduced to all of the rest of the Davids. That they're here now for revenge! No, justice. Yeah, that's right. Sorry, justice. I love the conflicting portions of David, but again, that's part of his psyche. He is falling apart on this. And now we have Charles, the potential ally, knowing that he's up against someone bad. What does he do? And even through all of this, Charles doesn't freak out. That's what I'm saying. His ability to process all of this really, I think, is the strength of Charles that isn't talked about, isn't presented, it's not dwelled upon and anything else. But he's able to just take all of this new information, and yeah, it may throw him off for a second, but he doesn't rebel against it. He doesn't try to dismiss it. So what does he do? Does he deal with the crazy David? Does he go with Farouk? What are the choices that he has? Until, of course, he finds out about the monkey and the little girl. That all of Farouk's presentation of things is all a lie. He took over the kingdom because he put the personality of the king inside of a monkey. All the detractors, everyone that was up against him, he took all of their personalities and put them in the head of this one little girl. Nobody has a voice. That's why they're all play. That's why they're just subjects. They're just pieces on a chessboard for Farouk to move around. He is a monster. So it ends up being Charles and David getting together because whatever the issues, whatever the problems with David, there is something big to deal with now. And at the very least, Charles can say is that he is trying to stop this happening to his son in the future. Now, Sid, on the other hand, again, going back to stop David, but not in the way that she thought. And I loved how this was sort of presented as well. Now, one thing that we have seen throughout the episodes are these little hitches in time as our time cats, the time eaters, are going through and removing bits of time. And we see that repeated throughout the scenes with all of our little flashbacks and moments. And we're also seeing as things start to change a little bit from their previous incarnation. When Sid and the Carries appear on the front lawn of Gabrielle and David's house. Which we used to have that scene where Gabrielle had walked down the steps and seen the floating doors that were sort of apparently pulled off of the hinges. And now that's erased and moved. And instead, the doors are there, but so is Sid and the Carries. And now we have someone to stabilize Gabrielle. Because what we learned throughout this is that, of course, she deals with mental illness of her own. It comes in the family. That's where David gets it. In some ways, then, David's condition, it's not his fault. It's hereditary. It's in fact something that really has been put on him. Both having kind of an unstable mental genetic background, runs in the family, and then being put upon by Farouk's consciousness hiding out inside of his mind. I mean, that is all of the elements you need for insanity right there. But a lot of that has happened and is susceptible because Gabrielle, being alone, and David, of course, traveling back in time and trying to communicate, kept throwing her off. Her first question to Sid, looking at the doors, can you see this too? Is this real? Once you knows that somebody else can see it, that these things are not happening just to her, it can stabilize her psyche, maybe be a bit more attentive mom. And that's really what Sid is going for this entire time, is you must take care of your kid. You can't lose it. You can't become catatonic. You can't give up your kid to somebody else. You must love this child like the world depends upon it. Because it does. And the fact that Sid is going after that in that manner, I mean, again, it's establishing what she's learned. Some people can be saved, some people cannot. Adult David, he's too far gone. Baby David still can be saved if she can be attentive as well. And we see some interesting things here, too. The scene what we saw in the previous episode when David was going back in time with Mom giving baby David the scary doll of the world's angriest boy. In this one, it's a bear. So where does that twist come in? Is this part of the insanity of babies? They sort of hit on that as well, that babies have no logic. Everything is just emotion to them. They see something, it exists. They don't see something, it's gone. Is this an early indication of David's own impending insanity or projections from his mom? Because later on, we see the bear in the crib as well as the doll with the angriest boy doll. And is that the two possible directions that David can still go at this moment? Is that really, from a symbolic standpoint, what we're representing, what it is that we're seeing? So again, it's an interesting approach, and I think this is a great one to take Sid on because, again, like I mentioned before, it keeps them from having this big combative scene. Sid's trying to stop David. They're each trying to save David from two entirely different directions. Adult David is trying to stop Farouk from ever taking over his body and supplanting himself in his mind, whereas Sid is trying to just save young David from not being loved, from having, being suscepting, falling into that mental illness, being more susceptible to its curses. So I loved how they did with the whole Sid bit. I loved Carrie, like I mentioned before. Why didn't he kill a baby? But morally, you can't do that. But we see here, of course, really the influx of the time cats as well. Not only changing things, but then going after David. Great horror scene. They're taking out the heater in the basement. Then when they go after David, it's a beautiful bit because we're seeing small things being removed from reality. The mobile, the dresser, the desk, the walls. The one side, the drywall, all of the walls peering into outside. Going into David, the doll's disappearing, about all to disappear, and then bashed in the hammer by Sid. It was a great way to do it. And of course, let's get out of here, time to go. A good response speed from from Sid. But yeah, it's just, I loved how all of that was presented. I did think Gabriel was a little nonplussed about these new people just sort of popping up and living into life, but perhaps that's sort of the craziness. Certainly in contrast to when David showing up and scaring the hell out of her, with Sid and everyone else showing up, really more just someone to talk to. And maybe, like I said, that's really what's going to make the biggest difference in David's future life, is now maybe having his parents there. Now, of course, can't go on without talking about Farouk himself, trapped in the time between time. I love how they do the old movie versions of the time between time and the stop bits and giving the little title cards. Farouk Amal, Omega Telepath, Omega Mutant, resident of the time stream, part of the time stream we call the present, is now trapped in the time between time and cannot escape unless... Well, they sort of imply an egg cracked egg. And they did mention something about the time eaters protecting their young. I think there was a line when Farouk took them back before, was that the getting at their young was the only way to sort of threaten them. And I thought that's where Farouk was going here. And I was curious about him actually being even trapped in the whole time between time, considering that he was able to get there on his own power before. Is it just because Switch put him back this time? It wasn't sent. He didn't send himself there. He also seems to be a little out of phase even in the time against time. So maybe that was part of the effect of when Switch put him back, that he wasn't fully in that solid time space, but much like the time cats themselves, the time eaters, a little out of sync even in the time against time. Perhaps that's what had trapped him. But it didn't really trap him, because he's Farouk Amal. Amal Farouk. He is the Shadow King. And ends up using the time between time to travel back himself to join forces with himself. So that ends up going to be a really interesting bit. One, I also wondered, I had suggested that maybe Farouk was piggybacking on top of David as David was traveling back, that part of his psyche was within David. And perhaps he used that, if that's the case, to kind of hone in like a homing beacon of where to go and pop himself out. Though he, knowing possibly what David is going to do, he was there himself, he knows exactly where it is that he needs to go. So not entirely sure the mechanics of how Farouk was able to do this, but it does lead us to a very interesting double encounter now, because while it seems that the team up of David and Charles is going to be enough to defeat Farouk, is it enough to beat two Farouks? A Farouk of the past and a Farouk of the present, who has all that additional knowledge, who has invaded David's space, who is is more than just his older self. If he feels that he might be able to defeat David, because he's a tactician, even though David is stronger, with two of them, that's going to make a really interesting fight. And of course, I do have to throw out, if they defeat Farouk, do they defeat one Farouk and then it's the other Farouk that gets thrown out in the body and that's what happens? In effect, is David's time traveling going to actually create the circumstances that got him where he is in the first place? Always a danger with time travel. You may find out that you are the reason the past happened in the first place. All right, well, honestly, I think that covers everything. This is usually where I do a couple of small things, but no, I think that's it. I mean, there's a few moments with Switch, again, losing a lot of teeth, and talking about how time is becoming unstable. A lot of those flashes that we see with that episode does feel like the time cats, the time eaters, nipping away at things. Also the effects of the changes that David and Sid in their time traveling are making. But also could be reflective of just the general instability as everything is beginning to fall apart, which is the real dangers of all of this time traveling. I love the wandering through the hallways and the dizziness, and that's all throwing things off, and that David having to focus on his will. What was Farouk's statement? You determine your reality. Your reality is what you believe it to be through a force of your own will. I thought was cool. Also, really, I am hoping that Switch recovers. I am here, teacher, is her last saying. Does that mean that she's dying? Is she going? Is she not strong enough? We were talking about evolution. That's why it's happening. She has the power, but her body isn't strong enough. Also, I love the concept of, as she goes forward in time, does she get her teeth back? I don't think it works that way. But that was really the only additional stuff to talk about. What we have next week is the end, the final episode. What happens? Does David, the team up of David and Charles, able to defeat Farouk? Is Sid able to save baby David from ever following down that path in the first place? Are the Time Cats gonna eat everything up? Probably not the latter. I'm hoping that it all sort of works itself out, but we could run into this time loop of finding out that David ends up creating his own future self. Really a lot of possibilities. I don't put anything past this show. Only thing for sure is I cannot wait to see how it ends. So, thank you so much, as always, for joining me with these reviews. I hope that you're enjoying it as well. If you are, you know you can go ahead and hit that like button. Thoughts, ideas, and comments, throw those down in the section below. What do you guys think about this episode? Were there big moments in there for you, stuff that you wanted to see? Did you feel that it was just sort of build up to what's going to be a giant finale next week? And how do you guys want to see the show end? Give me your thoughts. Throw those down in the description below. You can always catch me on Twitter and Instagram. I am at Darren Jakes. Please subscribe. We're about to end here, but we just picked up the final season of Preacher. Not the best beginning in my mind, but I have a lot of faith through it. I've really enjoyed the first 3 seasons for it, so I've got hope that our 4th and final season also, much like this show, is going to wrap on a high note. Also, we are doing an Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. Season 6 discussion next Wednesday. That is the 14th, 6 p.m. Pacific, 9 p.m. Eastern. We'll have Rob Stone from Smirking Gun Reviews and Don Willie from A Dawn of Ice and Fire chatting with me about Season 6, what we liked, what we didn't like, what we are hoping to see in Season 7, its final season. So, a lot of finals going on here. Anyway, don't miss any of that stuff if you're a subscriber. Do that by clicking this button right here. And we'll throw up a couple of our latest reviews right here for you to check out. So, that's going to be it for me. I'm D, and I'm out of here. Catch you guys next time. Bye-bye.